On that freezing April morning, a senior at Virginia Tech chained a building doors shut and shot 48 people in 11 minutes before turning a gun on himself. One bullet cut a hole in senior Kevin Stern's thigh with his blood gushing onto the floor. He jammed a finger into his leg, then stuffed a sweatshirt into the wound and tied an electrical cord around his thigh as a tourniquet. He survived, but even now, he won't go back inside. Stern hasn't re-entered Norris Hall since 4 police officers rushed his limp body out of the blood-soaked building in the tragedy of April 16, 2007. But the real tragedy is that Kevin is only one of thousands of students who are afraid to enter the classrooms and go to class for fear of a mass shooting taking place. Gun violence is an epidemic in America, and yet the liberalization of gun laws is still occurring at an alarming level. In 2013, at least 19 states introduced legislation to allow concealed carry on campus, and in 2014, 14 more states introduced similar legislation. Last year, Texas became the most recent state to allow concealed carry on college campuses, which is why we stand firmly resolved that the United States should adopt substantially more restrictive gun control regulations, including a prohibition on carrying firearms on college campuses. What do we know about college campuses? We believe they are very unique environments in which education should be fostered and prioritized. We believe in intellectual thought being uncensored. We believe that students and faculty should not be afraid to share controversial ideas and engage in a dialogue to really make better problem solvers and eventually better policies after they graduate. But also on college campuses, you have dormitories. It's the first time students have moved away from home. And laptops we see are stolen all the time in dorms. But what if we replace the word laptop with a gun, and a gun is stolen from a student's dorm? What is the risk of that? Also on college campuses are unique places. Students sometimes come under the influence of drugs or alcohol or in heightened states of stress around final exams, which increases the risk of gun violence being escalated. And that brings us to our first advantage, namely the propensity of violence. Now, there's no empirical or anecdotal evidence that widely proves that guns stop crimes or make campuses safer. Guns can actually turn arguments lethal, and we see that this can happen a lot on college campuses. This is DePhillips and Hughes 15. Guns can also escalate otherwise quickly forgotten disagreements into fatal encounters. On October 9th last year, a fraternity fight broke out in Northern Arizona University. One of the participants ran to his car, grabbed his gun, and opened fire, killing one and injuring 3 others. Also, more guns mean more fatal accidents. I don't think I need to explain how a gun accidentally going off in a science lab with flammable chemicals could be harmful, but also in 2012 at Weber State University, a student was carrying a handgun in his pocket. It accidentally discharged and wounded him in the leg. Even military, for instance, in the U.S. military from 2003 to 2011, more than 90 soldiers died from negligent discharges. So we know that even with the proper training, fatal accidents can still occur, and we just cannot advocate this. And secondly, educational harms. Campus carry will make students and faculty less inclined to engage in critical intellectual work that must take place in the classroom. How do we foster this environment? First, we see in the status quo with the most recent law passed in Texas about campus carry that professors are already leaving out of fear, right? We're seeing a kind of brain drain with some of the best professors in UT Austin leaving the institution for fear of having to deal with any type of gun violence and students being able to have guns in the classroom. Also, as my partner will touch on later, risk of grade inflation in the classroom, right? What's to stop a student from bringing or holding a gun to professor's head saying, you didn't give me an A, I need you to give it to me now. And so for all these reasons, we need to foster this safe space, right? Because we already protect students from trigger words, we should also be protecting them from triggers themselves. And so it's the right thing to do, and the harms outweigh. Because at the point where college campuses are such a unique environment, at the point where accidental injuries and fatality can hurt the learning environment, we need to pass this ban. And so when we see the fact, a 2002 study found that having a gun at college was associated with engaging in more risky and aggressive behavior. as well as drinking heavily. It's a major factor in firearm violence. So we believe that fewer guns will be less escalation of violence and fewer fatalities, and to really foster that environment of academic freedom and not access to educational harm. So we proudly propose. Thank you.
Okay. I'll let you
Right. I always forget.
cross-X. Okay. So, did a ban on campus carry stop the Virginia Tech massacre?
No, but we saw that the Virginia Tech massacre was before any campus carry debates really started taking place. It's what fostered them, and that's why we're proposing this today.
But it didn't stop it.
No.
Okay. Also,
Or I don't know the gun policy at the time of Virginia Tech, so I couldn't say.
there was a ban on campus carry. Have you been to a science lab before?
Yes.
Are
I'm
you
a
allowed
comm major, but I don't stay away from science.
well, a bottle of water isn't a bottle of water illegal in a science lab?
Mm-hmm.
So how would a firearm be legal there if a bottle of water is illegal?
Well, we're saying they shouldn't be legal on the entirety of campus, especially dormitories where students have very strong access and they risk being stolen.
But I'm saying you said that it's bad to have a gun in a laboratory because it could cause explosion, but if you can have a bottle of water, how are you going to have a gun?
I mean, that's one example, right? We've given numerous others.
Also, when you talk about grade inflation
Yeah.
and how firearms would cause that, isn't that just a hypothetical situation? Like, do you have any evidence that would support
Actually,
that?
we have about 7 examples of that happening all over the country. If you'd like that now, I can give it.
Yes, I would like that.
Yeah, great. Okay, Golan 15. Here's an example of one such threatening experience. One evening in a graduate course, after I handed back students' papers, a young woman stood up and pointed at me. This is unacceptable. She said, okay, I'm sure I probably shouldn't spread it, I don't know. As her body shook in rage, she moved toward the front of the class, waving her paper in my face. As if this wasn't enough, the woman's classmates avoided me on campus. Every time she turned in the paper, I cringed and prayed it was good so that I wouldn't have to give her anything less than an A. 2014, Purdue, a student shot his instructor in a room full of students. Northern Virginia Community College shot his math professor on campus. 2000, graduate student at University of Arkansas shot his English professor.
Okay. I'm finished.
Thank you.
Pepper, are you ready?
Like a.
Sorry.
I just got like 2 minutes.
Sure. It's up to you.
Smith and UCLA Law Review 2015 bans on firearms in student housing effectively bar students from possessing the firearms altogether. These uniquely burdensome characteristics may weaken the university's government as proprietor argument. The university risks a challenge based on the doctrine of unconstitutional conditions that a government may not grant a benefit on the condition that the individual receiving the benefit surrender a constitutional right. College regulations allow the college to search dormitory rooms when the college officials had reasonable cause to believe the students violated regulations. An absolute ban on the possession of a firearm in student housing constitutes an absolute ban on the ability of a student to bear such a firearm in self-defense. The absolute forfeiture of the central component of the Second Amendment right to bear arms may give courts pause when considering whether to apply the government as proprietary justification. Also, the Second Amendment, or college campuses are the unique place to have discussions over the Second Amendment. A prohibition would shut down our First Amendment right to discuss the desirability of guns on campus. Debate over allowing concealed weapons in thus far off-limits public situations isn't confined to the campus. Under the First Amendment, we should be able to talk, promote, encourage debate, discuss, or oppose virtually any idea and its merits and demerits. Free and open debate not only places differing views in the public marketplace of ideas, but also may well encourage those opposed to make their own stand and response. If an intellectual, informed exchange of ideas in search of a solution and common ground should find a welcoming atmosphere anywhere in society, it would seem to be at colleges and universities. Just on the campus carry demonstration issue, here's a solution. Students should be able to have a full, vigorous, and collegial discussion of their Second Amendment rights by exercising their First Amendment freedoms. So on the deal of a safe space, free speech is dead on college campuses due to the safe space, due to the safe space movement. So this is Hinkle and the death of free speech on college campuses. A student legislative council at UC Irvine approved a resolution to ban the American flag from student government offices. Recently, the student government at George Washington University approved a measure requiring student leaders to attend LGBT sensitivity training. Episodes such as these, along with the increasing demand for trigger warnings and campaigns to stamp out microaggressions, illustrate the snake swallowing its own tail nature of political correctness. Efforts to make a classroom a safe space have made classes unsafe for those whose views deviate from the campus norm. It deploys macroaggression to punish some non-aggressive acts as the peaceful withholding of consent. The second reason for protecting students from thoughts and ideas they find upsetting is to spare their tender feelings. But this effort is self-defeating. A regime that protects everyone's free speech rights can allow both the gay rights advocate and the Christian fundamentalist to speak her mind. Those who cherish individual liberty and abhor censorship of any kind. There are still a few of them left, even in modern-day American campus. Also, on your the idea of brain drain, the Texas brain drain is false. Newest data puts Houston as the #2 city in terms of retention rate. Now, we view brain, or essentially the intellectual body of a campus, to not just be professors, but the students themselves. As a result, cities and metros across the United States have greatly increased their efforts to retain college graduates. But new data research provided to us by Jonathan Rothwell at the Brookings Institution's Metropolitan Policy Program enables us to zoom in much more precisely on which metros are winners and losers in retaining their college talent. Houston, in Texas, is second with a 75.9% retention rate. So although some professors may be leaving, they're retaining a large number of graduate students in the area, which essentially allows them to keep their intellectual body strong. Also, professors regularly leave campuses for various reasons, and you are also not accounting for the numbers coming in, which is just standard flux. The fact that professors are leaving is not dependent or influenced by the legalization of firearms. So your issue of dormitories and people being able to steal firearms, which is only going to increase threats, is not very, well, it's just not that relevant, because it is easy for anyone to go off campus or for someone off campus to bring a firearm onto campus illegally. So if someone wishes to acquire a firearm, they can go off campus and get one. They don't have to steal one, so that's not going to increase the number. Also, any legislation to limit the number of firearms has always invariably, even the proposition of such legislation leads to a massive increase in firearm purchasing. So if you argue that there is a threat of self-harm in firearms, your attempt to publish this legislation will actually lead to increase in firearm accidents, as there's a pushback where people buy a large number of firearms.
Great.
That's time.
On your free speech train of argument, were you saying that safe spaces are dead, or that free speech is dead on college
Free
campuses?
speech is dead because of safe spaces.
Okay, how is that not counterintuitive to your advocacy that the alternative is a free discussion of Second Amendment rights?
It is not, because so what we're saying is that restricting free speech, such as what safe space does, that takes away free speech. Guns are a way for people to express themselves. Invariably, the people who support guns on campus are the ones who, a lot of times, cherish their guns. They feel a very close connection. And that is one of the ways they express themselves is through gun ownership. So by taking those away, all you are doing is limiting their free speech and their ability to express themselves.
Okay, wouldn't we rather table one discussion to have off campus and still be able to have discussions about racism and hate crimes and political activism without fear of guns?
I don't believe there is fear of guns in these situations.
Okay, that's a really good question. How would you describe the state of like how Americans view guns in the status quo? Are they normalized?
Firearms are a typically normal thing. I think there are over 300 million owned in the U.S. To many people, they're just part of life. They're just common.
Okay, and finally, the prohibitions leading to gun purchasing, how would that work on a college campus? Like, if college students can't bring the guns to campus...
We're talking about the overall issues. So
Okay,
anytime someone tries
issue.
to introduce legislation or an idea, even in President Obama's Freedom of the Union address when he talked about how we need more gun control, people immediately started purchasing more guns. That will happen overall. And if you argue that there are issues that come from that, such as like self-harm, all you're doing is increasing that problem, especially off campus.
And finally, with the Texas brain drain, if good professors are leaving and a ban could keep them, why not pass the ban?
Because there is no correlation there's a correlation, but that does not mean causation. We do not know that those professors are leaving for that reason.
For the past 10 years, I've been struggling with depression. It's something that's very hard for me to deal with. This past year, I've sort of been forced by different things going around to really fight this head on. But it's very difficult for me, and especially for a lot of other men who are not in tune with their emotions, who are not able to go access something else because they feel too prideful in order to discuss this. What the campus carry debate overlooks the possible impact of accessibility could have on suicide rates on a college campus. And we see this from Trace in 2016. Now, the majority of suicide attempts use poisoning or overdose and resolve fatality at only 2% of the time. However, firearm suicides will result in a fatality of 85% of attempts. So in a world where I have accessibility to this firearm in my dorm room, which they say I do, that would increase my likelihood of probably using that and ending my life, which I've already thought about suicidal thoughts before. And we think this is extremely harmful, which happens more on their side of the house. They try to equate this idea of the Second Amendment rights, and we agree. We agree that the Second Amendment right is there, but it never specifically states the location of where those rights occur. That's because states and schools have a right to decide should it be in my school or should it not. And we believe it shouldn't because it is not safe. Right? Especially when they're talking about that it can be used in a dormitory. Like, imagine where you have to keep these guns during the day, either in your car or in a dorm or in a classroom setting. Someone can easily take that gun, which is very easy to get in dorms, sadly, and then they can use it to shoot themselves or hurt someone else. We think that happens more on a negative world than in ours. But second, this discussion of rights, we find this really funny because on our side, you actually have that free expression, that free dialogue. Imagine you have someone who's a Christian carry and loves their guns versus a minority LGBT or African American that wants to have a discussion in class. If they get into a discussion in class where guns are available, something might break out. There's a higher likelihood because the gun is present that either A, something might break out, or B, they will deter speech. They're going to silence someone else out. And we think that happens more in a negative world than in us. But let me explain to you why our world is a lot better, right? Because campus is safer without guns. This is from the Cleric, the Act of 2013. They try to talk about Virginia Tech shooting. We agree, but that's a very rarity in this event. In 2013, the homicide rate at post-secondary education institutions was at 0.1% for 100,000 enrollments. By comparison, the criminal homicide rate in the United States was 4.4% of 100,000. In addition, another study in 2001 by the Department of Education found the overall homicide rate of post-secondary education institution was 0.07 per 100,000 enrollment in 1999. In comparison, there was 14.1 per 100,000 per person ages 17 to 29.2. So by decreasing, by not having this ban, it allows for this not to occur. The homicide rates are going down, and we see this as a really big benefit, especially if they're using it to kill themselves in addition to homicide. But more importantly, we find that this is really apprehensive coming on their side of the house because we believe that guns can turn arguments extremely lethal. And their partner Gerson from Delphins and Devin Hughes, other examples occur, right? So on January 22nd, 2013, argument described describe as like really stupid, escalated into a fight on a Lone Star State College campus. One of the men pulled a gun and injured the other combat, also wounded a nearby maintenance worker. So when we see like little simple things escalate into like a really full-on lethal battle, we think this is extremely harmful. At least in our world, they're able to maybe cool off, or just like, okay, they get into an argument, they curse each other out, and that's the end of it. On a negative world, they allow that opportunity to escalate and maybe harming someone and killing someone. We think this is extremely harmful, especially when it goes into the educational classroom, right? Because the presence of guns can lead to a grade inflation, which Jessica Smart-Galoon talks about, right? Because when they also talk about examples that my partner stated, that you have on the Northern Virginia Community College, they tried to shoot his math professor, and in 2000, a graduate student in the University of Arkansas shot his English professor. Not only are these teachers leaving, the best and brightest, because they're afraid of getting shot, they said, oh, it's okay, then you have graduate students who become teachers. Sure, that's cool, but at the point where the best and brightest are leaving, and now allowing these students to get access, and again, this is the University of Texas. They bring you like examples for the University of Houston. That's a different situation. The University of Texas is what we're talking about here, and that's extremely harmful, but it doesn't allow these students to actually get this safe space of the idea, to actually self-empower. Students come to university to actually learn who they are and learn about other cultures and ideas. On negative world, that doesn't really allow to take place, because just the presence of a gun can deter that explosion, can deter that liberation of ideas to truly take place, right? And we think this is harmful. To also talk about this gun back time thing, that's a societal thing, right? And on societal, this is really non-unique to this argument about what's going on campus. And they talk about free speech, Hingle in California. Sure, that's like a horrible thing, but we're talking about the safe spaces are more likely to occur in an environment where we're happening. Imagine what's happening in Missouri, right? You should have like gun police brutality. In the school of Missouri, minorities fought back through freedom of speech, and they have a gun ban on Missouri's campus, and they're able to take out the white institutional racism there, and they're able to file their own president. That's awesome. Those are social movements that only happen in an affirmative world without guns, and less likely to happen in their world. And that's time. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's time either way.
You had to get to it.
So ready for cross section whenever you guys.
Yeah, completely.
Alright, so you argue that without firearms, safe space is more likely to occur, and yet our evidence shows that safe space actually ultimately suppresses free speech.
That doesn't make sense, because why are we going to use firepower instead of brain power, right? Like, just a near presence of a gun, as we've stated, think about this logically. If we had a gun in this room and you had a very different opinion than me, and I was like, no, you better not say that, you're going to be like, whoa, okay, all right, I'll back off, I'll kind of stay quiet now. But not having those guns allow, okay, maybe what you think might have interesting thoughts. Like, for me, like, thinking a lot more liberally than I used to is because of these safe spaces that are created on my campus and other campuses across the country.
So, but what if, say, you pulled a gun on me and he was holding a gun, and then you have a point at me, he pulls it out, sticks you, and says, put your gun away, we're going to talk about this quietly.
Yeah,
So the problem is you're bringing up all these hypotheticals. Sure. You don't have actual things.
So not only did you deter me, but he deterred you. So we're all deterring each other.
No, he deterred you from shooting me.
Great. So now it's really hostile. So it's like no one can really talk about anything. We're going to start like who's going to shoot first.
No. See, my point is that I'm asking you how we can just keep making hypothetical statements. So how are they really applicable to this? I can stand here and I can make any hypothetical statement I want.
Because at the point where we're bringing you examples,
how does it influence the argument?
This is how it influences the argument. At the point that students, not only in a safe space, but they're upset that they got to be in a classroom, and there's teachers that have actually gotten shot and killed because of this, that only escalates if these students are armed, and let's say 50 students are armed, and the teacher is really worried.
Okay,
so
my
they
question
can
is, did those happen on areas where those firearms were legal, or did they illegally bring those firearms in and shoot at their teacher?
They brought them in, and they shot their teacher.
So these were not law-abiding people who were holding their guns legally.
The fact that they were
law-abiding, gone through background checks and all the other extensive requirements.
Aside from the fact that background checks are not really that great to begin with, so you got to have that on either world. The more important thing to talk about here, imagine that currently happened in sort of a safe space, which is 0.07 per 100,000 incidents. Imagine what happens more in a negative world, where that allows more people to have guns, more accessibility, and there are probably people who don't have the mental capability or shouldn't have a gun. They're able to have a gun in a negative world. We think that creates more of these horrible situations to occur, and more teachers are going to be dead, more grades are going to be inflated, and more teachers are going to leave because they don't want to teach an institution that propagates this type of culture of violence.
All right.
Okay, I want to take a couple minutes to make a speech. So yeah, I'll give myself like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
How much total prep time do we get?
5. You're at 3. You have 3:15 left.
Okay.
through the whole process, because concealed carry is a lot different than just getting a firearm.
Wait, let me write this out real quick.
In general, concealed carry is a lot different.
Okay, I'm going to use the remaining time just to set up for my preparation time.
Just everything in order.
Alright, the First Amendment is being suppressed if you suppress the Second Amendment. The freedom of speech is being suppressed by ending the debate over campus carry by making it illegal. If campus carry is illegal, then we will no longer debate it, and thus our First Amendment rights are being suppressed. And then carrying a firearm is an expression of one's First Amendment right. Guns can become part of one's identity, and thus limiting the rights to bear arms limits the First Amendment rights. The Second Amendment is a fundamental right you have as an American and is not to be infringed. As an American, one has the right to own and carry a firearm, and preventing a person with a concealed carry license from carrying on a college campus is a major suppression of a fundamental right. According to Supreme Court case, District of Columbia versus Heller, the precedent has been set by the Supreme Court that one has the right to protect themselves by finding Washington, D.C.'s handgun ban is unconstitutional. Thus, banning campus carry undermines the Supreme Court's authority. If we undermine the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution on the right to bear arms, we can undermine the Supreme Court's interpretation of the First Amendment and free speech, and that would limit what we can talk about. And you mentioned about depression. And really, when we talk about depression, we should be focusing on mental health reform and not guns. For example, the 30-year period through March 2013, there were 78 public mass shootings in the United States. That is shooting incidents with 3 or more people killed by a gunman. These 78 incidents accounted for 547 deaths of people, which are less than 1/10 of 1% of the 559,347 people that the FBI estimates were murdered in the U.S. over this period of time. This point is that the number of mass public shootings has not exploded over the last 5 years. Mass shootings have not increased as frequently as claimed by the media. Instead, this evidence points to stabilization of the numbers of attacks and victims. Over half are known to have suffered from mental illness at some point prior to the attack. These are not heat of passion random acts. As you mentioned, and seem to say that all gun acts or acts of gun violence would be heat of passion acts. The active shooter tends more often than not to be motivated by a deeply personal grievance tinged with feelings of persecution and humiliation, real and perceived. Our focus needs to be to expand our mental health services, and others point to need to increase our levels. Okay. Also, gun deaths are decreasing, and more gun control won't stop current violence. The U.S. gun death rate is down, this is blanks, and this was April 7th. The United States gun death rate is down 31% since 1993, and the homicide rate has been halved. Non-fatal gun victimization is down a whopping 76%. 2/3 of American gun deaths are suicides. Background checks are unlikely to stop law-abiding citizens who want to shoot themselves. Suicide prevention must be comprehensive rather than simply focusing on gun regulations. Also, you mentioned that background checks don't really work that well, and while that may be true just for general purchases of firearms, to be able to carry a firearm on campus, you have to be a concealed carry permit holder, and that is one of the most stringent processes you can go through as far as firearms, because the process consists of going to court, submitting a request, then you have to go get fingerprinted, and I feel like criminals are not going to want to get fingerprinted because that just makes it easier for them to be caught. And then after that, you submit your form and your fingerprints to the FBI, and they do a stringent background check on you. And then after a time period, you get your concealed carry permit license. You have to be 21 years of age or older to be able to do this. So this isn't just like everyone on a college campus is going to be able to have a gun. Also, you made it sound like just like everyone with a gun is bad, and just because you have a gun, like you're going to go shoot someone. That's just not the case. I mean, like homicide rates aren't 100% with gun owners, so that shows that that's just not the case. Not the case. Okay.
You ready?
Ready for it.
Cool. So, in the case of a DC versus Heller, was this did it rule based like for campus carry, or was it just like DC in general?
Well, it set the precedent that you're allowed to use a gun to defend yourself. Like that's what comes out of this case.
Cool. All right. So, in regards to your First Amendment right, do you need a gun present to talk about gun issues?
No, but I mean, if you get rid of the gun, or if you suppress people's right to bear guns, then the debate is over. Like, it's already been...
How is the debate over? Are we currently having it now without a gun in the room?
Because the legislation hasn't been passed. Like, if we pass legislation, let's say in a hypothetical situation, since you guys like to talk about hypothetical situations, all guns are banned, then there's no talk about guns anymore because they're banned, so...
That's based on a fallacy. We're talking about real situations. But let's go on to suicide. So, you stated yourself that we need comprehensive suicide reform, correct?
Yes.
So, at the point where a lot of times when you create suicides with a gun, why not start with taking out the gun first and then tackling mental health altogether?
Well, you need to solve the root cause of the problem. Just solving like parts of like the end of it aren't going to really solve it. I mean, people can still kill themselves without guns. So,
Taking into consideration how long that will take, isn't this a step in the right direction? To at least halt certain suicides now?
I mean, why don't you just fix the root of the problem? I mean, if you can, this is just delaying, it's postponing the problem. Like, more people would die because you're postponing the problem instead of going to the root cause of the problem and saying, all right, like, what is causing people to have suicidal thoughts? Like, how can we address this? Not saying, like, oh, well, if people don't have guns, then maybe a few less people might kill themselves. Like, they can still find other ways to kill themselves if they really want to do so.
Okay. Go for it. So, could you explain to me, again, in regards to the First Amendment, how having a gun present wouldn't deter freedom of expressions and ideas?
Because just because you have a gun doesn't mean that you're going to pull it out on someone to go shoot them. Like,
then could you explain to me what happened to the teachers that they gave the kids a bad grade and then they got shot?
That's just a very small situation. Those are just a few rare situations. That's like saying,
That's
like,
thanks, then.
okay.
Sorry. Okay.
Alright, so when you mentioned that removing firearms will help stop, people who might be depressed or have mental health issues from committing suicide, that your proposition does not solve that issue. It is very easy for one of them to merely go off of campus and they can obtain a firearm there, or and kill themselves with that, or they can commit suicide in any one of the many possible ways without a firearm. For your grade inflation argument, those firearms were brought in illegally and they fired at teachers. So even if you ban firearms on campus, you aren't going to take away that problem. That doesn't solve anything. The safe space movement is honestly worse self-censorship than gun ownership. Law-abiding citizens with firearms are not going to pull it out and shoot someone over a petty argument. So, and even in the few cases that they do, the Second Amendment, the Second Amendment is an inherent right for all Americans, and it cannot be suppressed. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that their entire argument is largely based upon hypotheticals, and they keep on bringing in, well, what if this happened, and someone could do this? The bottom line is, none of their idea of completely eliminating firearms on campuses will not solve for any of the issues they've brought up. The problems they've cited are people illegally bringing in firearms. These are people who probably aren't even 21, bringing in a firearm and shooting at a teacher. For someone to actually own a firearm legally, they must, as my partner said, be 21 and go through a very stringent process to make sure they have no background issues. While there are some problems with background checks for general firearm purchases, concealed carry permits are much harder to get and are a completely different level than a standard firearm permit. They also argue that accidents can occur from firearms. However, proposing legislation to ban guns is only going to increase these accidents as the pushback from it, as there's pushback as people purchase more firearms. I'd really appreciate you guys don't start laughing in the middle of my speech. It's kind of rude. So, as people purchase more firearms, all you're going to do is increase the likelihood of these accidents occurring. And yeah, and it's for these reasons that I feel they have not actually proposed a valid solution, and you should vote for the negative.
You're going to use prep time?
Yeah, yes, please, I'll take it.
Sorry about that.
Sorry,
I didn't mean to do that.
I hate when people do that, my bad.
All right, let's talk.
Coming out of the last speaker, we've heard a lot of attacks on our solvency, but I want to admit that he conceded that even if we have 1% of solvency, the world does get better, right? We saw that happen. And even more so, we're debating about whether also this is the right thing to do. But in case you don't buy the moral argument, here are some reasons that we have solvency from the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence. As a result of campus carry prohibitions, fewer students have access to guns on campus, making campuses safe learning environments. Less than 2% of the college students reported being threatened with a gun while at school, and there were 11,920 total gun homicides in the U.S., but only 10 total murders or non-negligent homicides on the nation's college campuses that have banned campus carry. And violent crime for college students aged 18 to 24 declined significantly between 1995 and 2002. We have solvency. This is a good thing to do, and it also will affect the world in a better way. They try to say on the suicide flow that mental health reform should come first, not banning guns. So my first point on that is what happens faster, right? Mental health reform could take months, if not years. Banning guns can happen tomorrow, and we can get the guns off the campuses. But also, can't we do both, right? There's not any funding restrictions in this debate. We could bring both, so we could bring safety faster and more long-term. On background checks, this is their alternative they suggest, right? They say, okay, gun owners go through background checks, they can be responsible. But Gun Owners of America 2011 say that criminals can easily bypass background checks because fake IDs allow criminals to easily skirt them. And also, we have criminals on both sides of the debate. We think this point is very non-unique. And so, continuing, I think another huge thing in this debate has been First versus Second Amendment rights. As my partner eloquently stated out, we're having this debate about gun control without a gun in the room. And not all forms of speech are protected in the United States. Speech that presents a clear present danger, hate speech, right? These are not protected forms of speech because it blurs the line where my rights end and your rights begin. But on college campuses, we can't allow this. They say that the First Amendment is suppressed when the Second Amendment is, but just because you read a card that says that doesn't mean it's true. And also, arguments without cards aren't inherently false either, as they try to present to you. We want you to use your common sense judgment today to judge this round and vote for the affirmative at the point where we are solving these harms and bringing safety, security, and a space for open dialogue on college campuses. So again, when the only real alternative they bring is that kind of status quo or maybe more strict background checks, we don't solve that either. And again, as my partner brought up, on the suicide, they try to say, oh, students will just go off campus. I'd like to point out that, first of all, gun fatalities and suicide are 85%. If they find another way to kill themselves without a gun, it's only a 5% fatality. Students live in the dorms on campuses, right? They are most likely to kill themselves on campus. So we believe fewer guns equals fewer suicides, especially for males. So in college-age males are less likely to seek out mental health because of their pride, because of the way they've been socialized, and because they're shamed for their sadness. We don't want that to happen. We need to take the guns out of their hands and also send the message, right? Set a precedent in the right direction that says we are not for guns. We are not for the normalization of this culture of war that the negative tries to bring us. And they try to, the only real offensive argument, besides all the rebuttal they brought us, the offensive is their First versus Second Amendment thing. And again, not all speech is protected in the United States. And so on grounds that we are actually expanding ground for the First Amendment on college campuses. We are allowing colleges to reach their potential for what they were meant to do, to be places of open learning environments where professors aren't fearful of losing their jobs or losing their lives, and where students are not fearful of losing their lives. As I brought up in my Virginia Tech example, students should never be afraid to enter the classroom, which is why we proudly propose. Thank you.
Okay, so I get 5 minutes or 4 minutes to prepare.
How much did you all use the first time?
You've used them already, I think.
I think you used all your time to.
Oh,
So it's
No.
5 times.
It's
No?
like 5 total.
Okay, okay.
I think you have 2 minutes left because you used 3 last time.
Okay.
I don't. You,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
Was like each person has 5?
No.
To the
Total.
team. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's confusing. Huh?
Yeah, I'll probably be using like a minute or less. So.
Sounds.
First off, I'd like to say correlation does not equal causation. Just because professors have been leaving after gun laws were implemented, that doesn't mean that that actually is causing that. You have to perform a t-test on the data with a 95% confidence interval to show that the law allowing concealed carry caused the professors to leave. So that evidence is invalid. Also, you mentioned that criminals can still get guns. So criminals would commit crimes and they can still get guns while stuff is banned. So what is the point of banning stuff if criminals can still get the guns? And they're going to be the ones who be committing the crimes. And in order to address the problem of suicide and mental health, we really need to address the root cause of this. Like, just postponing and like trying to come up with like patches isn't going to solve this. We need to come up with an actual root cause to fix this, and banning guns is not the answer to that. While these people have appealed to your emotion, I implore you to listen to our logic. As we've shown, the Second Amendment and the First Amendment go hand in hand. The Second Amendment doesn't suppress the freedom of speech, but rather it encourages it. In addition, the right to bear arms is independently a constitutional right defended by the Supreme Court, and to undermine the Second Amendment would be to undermine the Supreme Court. When the safe space movement suppresses the First Amendment, they have no sort of rights impact because their First Amendment argument has already been suppressed. Even if you believe that gun ownership does not promote self-actualization, you still buy the argument that any attempt of the affirmative plan leads to increased gun ownership, which causes more accidents and trickles down into the off-campus guns inherently coming onto college campuses anyways, which is seen in the Virginia Tech massacre. Despite the gun prohibition, campus gun prohibition at Virginia Tech, campus shooting was not prevented, but was made much worse. I'd like to conclude by saying, as Benjamin Franklin said, those who give up essential liberty to purchase a temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.
There's two competing worlds in today's debate. A world where, sure, like you can access more guns, and they say that protection of the Second Amendment right means that it allows to First Amendment more free speech, and then we tell you that actually deters more speech because of the deterrence already we talked about already in cross-examination. Just my presence of a gun deters his own freedom of speech. But now they're also trying to bring up the idea that criminals get it anyways, right? And criminals are going to go out and kill people in Virginia Tech. But then if our point still stands about suicide, everyone will already kill themselves to begin with their own guns. So what are we left with? The criminals are there killing no one. There's no one left to kill. Not necessarily everyone's going to die, but that's a really sad story to portray. But the idea is that because you have a gun in your possession, you're 85% more likely to actually kill yourself. Whereas when you're not using a gun, you're a lot less likely to occur. So even if the criminals do that, you're actually going to kill yourself. And we think this is horrible because people are thinking about this for a long time. And this mental health idea, you need to expand this on multiple levels. That's really the only impact they give us on that point. But more importantly, this idea of freedom of speech, right? We really, you can really cross-relate this to the idea of educational harms. Because at the point that they're trying to make this into a statistics class, they need all this T values and all this other stuff. The matter of the fact is our evidence states that the Texas brain drain is occurring, and these teachers are leaving because of fear of the presence of guns. That's enough of a causation and a correlation for the negative team. But even further than that, then what you're left with is teachers who are staying there, they're fearful of this grade inflation. Like, I have to give this person a better grade, or I hope he did well in this grade, or she did well in this grade, for occurrence that I don't have to get a good grade or not going to get shot, like those three examples we brought to you of Purdue, Northern Virginia Community College, and others. But this idea of a safe space is really important. I think this is the crux of this debate. And we provide a safer space because think about it. Because at the point that they are conceding that there's going to be a propensity of violence, that more issues are going to occur, that would happen in Northern Arizona University, where just a simple altercation turned into violence. We're not necessarily going to be a full-on civil war going on in the classroom, but we're going to say because of the deterrence and people are going to be upset about different issues and ideas flowing through, you're not going to have this freedom range, and different minority groups such as the LGBT, such as African Americans and Hispanics actually have a say now on college campuses, and it's because of these freedom of speech laws. Think about what I talked about in Missouri, right? How in Missouri there wasn't guns on campus. They were actually able to fight the institution, which they thought wasn't actually helping them out. They got them dethroned. But having a gun on campus decreases that likelihood for them to actually want to stand up because they're marginalized within their community. And we think this type of ban allows them to have more freedom of speech. But this is why college campuses are unique. They try to bring this really interesting argument. Second Amendment rights, we all have a right to bear, true, but it does not determine the location. The location is determined by the states and their constitutions. So the point that they're trying to say that 42 states are non-constitutional, no, right? There's why there's a discrepancy in the Second Amendment, and these states actually want to protect themselves so they don't harmful. It's also important to realize the other world that we're trying to live in, dorms are a place of like people are learning where they are, right? They're probably smoking weed for the first time, maybe drinking for the first time, but this leads to more risky behavior, and if you add a gun into play with that, it increases the likelihood that things could get lethal. Not because people hate each other, but because people are intoxicated, can't really think properly. And the fact that this is a horrible aspect. And additionally to censoring the educational harms, again, you're censoring freedoms of speech, but you can still talk about guns that we're doing today or in a classroom without the appearance of a gun, right? I can still talk about minorities, about having more in the room. Like, there's things we can still discuss. Due to the liberalization of these gun laws, we feel like we're going down a very slippery slope where no longer are we protecting the freedom of speech of all, but more importantly, all these different accidents occur. even military who have background checks, who are actually well trained, they have very likely fatalities of messing up in their guns. Imagine someone who isn't that well trained, who passes a background check. Like, this is the type of world that the negativists try to sell you, and quite frankly, we don't buy it. We want a safer environment for all, more freedom of speech, and safety for low likely people like me can actually save our lives and not think about contemplating suicide with a firearm. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, I was like, that's over, right? Wait.
Oh, sorry, dude.
I thought it was a close debate in a lot of ways, and pretty good. I ended up voting affirmative. I think that I came kind of close to voting negative because of this one argument that they were sort of repeating that you'll never really answer, which is that when you try to limit guns or prohibit them, it actually causes more people to get guns, which is sort of like a basic turn case, I don't know, whatever you call it in your world. But the problem for you all in this argument is how this links up with the, I guess, the impacts or the harms that people are trying to resolve in this debate. Because I don't know, I guess there's two big issues, but in terms of like people dying, the question that they're talking a lot about is suicides, and particularly like depressed people committing suicide. And that doesn't, there's a disconnect for me between the idea that like maybe guns rights people who are really freaked out about a court case are going to go out and buy a bunch of guns because they think that their rights are being abridged, and the idea that like all the depressed people in the world are going to like stock up on guns early, right? You know, like just in case things get dark, right? You know, and that argument it could be made, but to me there's a kind of, and I think that they're pretty good on the importance of suicide as being kind of like the issue that we're trying to solve here. And so I ended up thinking that this kind of turn or whatever doesn't quite get you there. And then the second sort of maybe big issue, I guess, was this sort of Second Amendment, First Amendment question. I think part of the problem is that I'm not totally sure what the impact or the kind of significance of you all winning this argument is, right? So I think that you say that it hurts the Supreme Court or like it undermines its authority. You know, like, why does that matter, right? Like, I don't totally know, and I think that that's something that you need to go a little farther on. Like, why does it matter that the Supreme Court's authority is tarnished? Or in the same way, you know, sort of like, I mean, I guess we just can't give up our liberties, but like I would like a little more on kind of like why is it significant to protect our liberties? What, you know, maybe for instance that causes more government abridgments of other liberties, that leads to like tyranny, something like that. But it was left a little vague, and so I think that it's hard for me to say that that outweighs what I thought were like reasonably warranted arguments about the dangers that gun violence holds. And then I guess the final sort of big issue that you all were raising was this correlation causation issue. I thought it made a lot more sense in the last debate where you all made this argument. But part of the issue here is that I actually don't necessarily think they're really making correlative statements. Like, the professors are leaving because of the guns, right? Like, this guy at Texas, like, said that. And so in the abstract, this makes a lot of sense. But when we're talking about these specific issues that they're talking about, to say that, like, this is just correlation, it's not as persuasive as when we're saying, like, you know, statistically, when there are no guns in a place, that causes more violence, right? Like, that is a more reasonable criticism. But when we're just talking about, like, does having a gun in a classroom create situations where people die, like, the evidence that they present seems reasonably clear. So that was the reason that I didn't end up voting on that argument. And so, yeah, I think that at the end of the day, you know, both teams debated really well. But there's probably I feel like it's a little bit better to end up trying to, I don't know, get rid of some of the guns and stop the depressed folks from being depressed in a violent way. Yeah, sorry, that was a little long-winded, but do you have any questions?
Is there any other arguments that kind of worked for us, or
aside
from the suicide one? Anything else you heard about, or was really mainly it come down to the suicide?
No, I mean, I thought that your argument, I actually thought the 1AR was a little bit better on this, like, amendment turn. I don't know, the idea that we, like, having a gun is a form of self-expression that could be violent or is violent, you know, depending on your perspective, whatever. And so in the same way that we don't accept hate speech, even though it's, like, literally free speech, like, guns are a kind of, I don't know, an analog, I guess. And I thought that argument was something that you could have pulled through to the end. And I thought a lot of your sort of, I don't know, safe space, sort of, we have to allow people to, like, flourish arguments were good. I also, in the same way that I thought some of their arguments were a little bit lacking in an impact, I think that you could go a little further, you know, like, obviously there is an emotional appeal to, like, we should save the university and make it, like, a fantastic space where everybody, like, talks and... But again, like, why does that matter? You know, like what is the real significance of that?
Exactly.
You know, so I think you could go a little further there as well. But yeah, no, I thought all the arguments that I was making were reasonable.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. You all?
Yeah.
I know, right? It's just a whole new world. Cool.
Too much paper.
We
This
made
is what
arguments.
happened when you choose not to use a laptop.
Hey, good job again, guys.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah.
Dare I say it? I miss the laptop because without it, you get this.
Do you